Hello and welcome to the All About Ability podcast. This podcast is sponsored by Kale Financial, specialists in mortgages and protecting your family's finances. Whether you're looking for the best mortgage for you or want to make sure you and your family aren't struggling if you're seriously ill or pass away, call Kale Financial on 0141 447 0290 or email advice@kale-financial.co.uk. I will include this information in the show notes. It's great to have you here, Adam.
Thank you for asking me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
It means a lot because I really enjoy the work you've done, and everything that you work towards is really something that is one of the reasons that motivated me to do this podcast. So I really do. You're one of the few people that we can actually look up to and be like, you're setting an example for the rest of us.
No, thank you. It's you're always acutely aware when you get into advocacy and you get really good at it and get a platform that you don't take it lightly, and also you've really got to try and make sure you don't mess up and sort of let the side down a little bit. And I've had incidences where I've sort of maybe done that. I've had a few more arguments on Twitter than I'd otherwise liked about insignificant things. But at the moment, the main thing that I'm discussing a lot on Twitter is Sia's new movie.
I seen you commenting on that. It was an interesting back and forth.
So the issue with the Sia movie and how it's being discussed, certainly on Twitter, is that not everyone is having the same conversation. And there's the Sia fans who are going, "Oh, her music's great and she's got a kind heart," and I don't doubt for a second that that's true. And then on the other side, you've got the people going, "Oh, she's a scumbag and she should die," yada yada yada. And I'm certainly not on that bandwagon either. I think that's thoroughly unacceptable behaviour. The conversation that needs to happen is around representation, particularly of disability in film and TV and media, which historically hasn't been great. And there were certain decisions made and certain groups consulted with who maybe weren't the best people to talk to. And initially, when the trailer dropped back in November, and all these things were highlighted to her, and very respectfully, I might add, she just kept snapping back at people and saying, "Maybe you're a bad actor. Oh, F this, F that, F the other. Watch my film before you judge it." And now the community are watching the film and are very much judging it. And I get acting is acting, and it's an endeavour, and to a certain degree, you're meant to portray someone who you're not. But I think when we talk about protected characteristics, things like race, gender, and disability, we need to be very careful how far we stray into that territory of anyone can play anything, because I find that argument holds little water under any scrutiny. If they were, for example, making another film, I don't know, Crazy Rich Asians 2, and they needed someone to play an 8-year-old girl, if I don't get a phone call, I'm not going to be offended. And if you don't get a phone call, you're probably not going to be offended, because we're grown-ass white men, right?
Yeah. I mean, when you put it like that, it really makes it black and white, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And the idea, and then but outside of that, rock and roll, when people make ridiculous arguments, someone on Twitter said if she made a film about fairies, she wouldn't have cast real fairies. And at this point, I don't know if he's being serious or not, because I don't want to break it to someone that fairies don't exist if they don't already know. That's their parents' job. And should only rapists play rapists? No, rapists belong in prison. No, they belong buried under the prison they're sent to, and nowhere near the film industry. And should only dinosaurs play dinosaurs? And yeah, it's a ridiculous counter argument.
Well,
So I think we need to have a good, long, hard look about how we handle disability on screen and off screen in the TV industry and the film industry, and give their voices a platform for an industry that is ever harping on about diversity. They're doing disability really badly.
exactly, and I think when you look at it, how can someone understand what it's like to have a disability who doesn't have one, and then play that out in a role? Really, doesn't
Yeah.
add up.
Well, if you're disability adjacent, that's another thing. If you're a parent of a child with a condition, you can advocate for them, and I think you can speak for a community, but without speaking over them. As long as you're adding to their voice and not drowning it out, and you have some level of proximity, rock and roll. But if you just watch Rain Man and thought, "Oh, I can do that," then maybe either don't do it, or certainly have a team of people around you from that community who have that first-hand experience, and make damn sure you listen to them. Don't just hire them to tick a box and then let them play ping pong or table tennis while the normals do the work.
Yeah, because you've been in a couple of really good movies, particularly Under the Skin, with Scarlett Johansson, and to get that kind of role, why do you think after so long, given the push for diversity like you speak about, we're still not seeing as many as we should in the film industry, whether it be on or off screen?
Mhm. Disability, when it comes to accessibility, is the only one of the protected characteristics that costs money to do right. We can all pretend that we're not racist, sexist, anti-Semitic, homophobic, insert your ism here. But in order to put in ramps and make what we call reasonable adjustments, you've got to put your money where your mouth is. I think that definitely plays into it. I also think people equate disability with inability, and there's a real heavy the shadow of what we call the medical model looms large and in charge in that environment, where we focus on what people can't do rather than what they can't do. And I also just think there's a lot of archaic, lazy excuse makers who unfortunately sit at the top of the industry. The idea that you can get 10 tons of camera gear up a hill, but you can't get an actor in a wheelchair up a hill is ludicrous to me.
I mean, the way you put that is really spot on in terms. I never even thought of it like that way, because sometimes I sit and scratch my head and wonder, they talk about equality so often, and you just don't see it. But like you say, the bottom line is it comes down to money.
Completely. And it's there as well. There are things like access to work, where if a company takes on a new employee with a disability that needs adjustments made, they can apply for up to £60,000 per candidate from the government. It's just that no one knows about it or knows how to navigate it. And we need to really fill that knowledge gap. And the only way we're going to fill that knowledge gap is by giving disabled people voices at all levels of industry.
Exactly, and it's just, I think it's something we, even with all this talk of equality, like I say, you just don't see this togetherness. Do you think that I have this theory that because we have so many different disabilities, it's easy to kind of break us up and divide us more than it is to help us together?
There's certainly a lot of infighting in the disabled community, and when it comes down to, let's get actual equality first. Let's get an equal foothold, and then once we've gotten that, we can have a calm and respectful conversation where we do some kind of nitpicking and focus on the minutiae and the finer details, because it's important to get those right. But let's get the thing that we all want first, and that's equality. I think we can all agree that slapping DNRs on people with mental disabilities is a crap thing to do. So let's focus on that rather than who should be doing it or why they should be doing it, and what have you. And I think that infighting, I think, just sets us back a lot, and it makes us all look a bit petty and stupid when we
Yeah,
aren't.
yeah. Because any other push that you've seen from any other minority, they've all done it together.
Yeah, completely, without any infighting, and they've all listened to each other as well. I think sometimes we forget that communication is a two-way street, and like my mother used to say to me, Adam Henry Pearson, you've got two ears and one mouth for a reason. And so, if you're not listening, you're not learning, and if you're not learning, nothing changes. So even if I think I'm right, I'll still take a step back and listen, and at least embrace the humility and know that I might be wrong. And if they can convince me, I'll happily go with it. I'm not above swallowing my pride and saying I never thought about it that way. Okay,
Yeah.
how can I help? How can I amplify your voice in this situation? And where does allyship and things like intersectionality enter into the playing field here?
Well, that's exactly it. For me as well, like even doing this podcast, there's been a lot that I've learned from, I've been in a wheelchair my whole life, and a lot of the things that I spoke about, I had a guy on called Mick Scarlett, and a lot of the things he said really resonated with me that I hadn't even considered about disability as a whole. So even people that are disabled, there's a lot of things we don't know about our own group.
Mm. I love and adore Mick Scarlett. Mick Scarlett is certainly he's a unique mammal, isn't he? Mr. Mick Scarlett. They don't make him like him anymore. Some might say that's a good thing. Not me, Mick. Just some people. He makes a lot of really good points, and yeah, I love our little community. Like 99% of it. There's that 1%, and I think we forget that as well. I think with the rise of, and there's been a lot of it in the pandemic. Sam Rank writes really well about this. The rise of disability porn and just the strong prevalence of nonsense like children in need sort of gives disability and disabled people a bit of a one-note flat character, that we're all heroic and inspirational. And which means when you
Yeah.
meet someone that means when you meet someone with a disability that's a bit of a knob and they're out there, you don't quite know how to handle it.
You're supposed to be inspirational. You're supposed to be the most motivated person ever. Why are you like
I
this?
know.
And I've had that before. Anytime that I snap at people, they'll say, this isn't you, just because you're in a chair. Like, I'm allowed to be annoyed still. I'm allowed to be frustrated and not be an angel all the time. It can be damaging for it in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I don't know if you watch the disabled community live tweet during Children in Need. I had a £5 bet with a good friend of mine who's a disability advocate that at some point that night they played Coldplay Fix You, because it's just that kind of song, isn't it? When you try your best but you don't succeed. Because that's the jumping off point for disability. We don't succeed, but we try. Good job, BBC. Good job. And they played it, and I was gonna text him, but then I saw his Twitter going, no, Coldplay, and effing and jeffing, and I was like, maybe I won't bring it up. Maybe he can keep his fiver. I'm a bit scared right now, and it's just those kind of little decisions that need to be dealt with. And again, it comes back to, where were the disabled people when these decisions were being made? Because if I'd have been in that room and they'd have been like, we're going to play Coldplay Fix You about disabled people, I'd have been the first person to put their hand up and be like, I have questions. Number one, why? Number two, why? And number three, I wouldn't do that if I were you.
It's the idea that we need fixed is one of the major issues. Like, you grow up with a disability thinking that you're incomplete almost.
Yeah, and when you flirt with something like cure culture, it becomes really dangerous. And again, back in the day, you just say that people would have said the same things about the LGBTQ community. Like currently, there's a bill going through at the moment to ban gay conversion therapy. Yeah, we can still do that with disability. And don't get me wrong, I'm all for diagnostic medicine and research and finding cures for things like cancer and what have you. But it's when these conversations are had by people outside of that profession who don't have that knowledge base, who just
Yeah.
see medicine and surgery as a quick fix for all itches, rashes, and disabilities.
Yeah, like there seems to be this idea that there has to be a solution. You can't be exactly where you are because that's not normal. You know.
No, it's very much disabilities still very much put into a problem solution model,
And
and it becomes a medical issue rather than a human issue.
exactly, disability rates or civil rights. Something I've seen recently from the I'm trying to remember his name now. I don't know if you've followed him on Twitter. I think his name's George. He's a disability rights lawyer, and I believe he's a wheelchair user as well. And he's a lot of the things he said about it I found really interesting in terms of just the way there's actual laws in place to have accessible buildings, and yet a lot of these buildings are still not accessible.
Yeah, no, completely. And the rail network was meant to be fully disability accessible at the start of this year. Surprise, surprise, it wasn't. A week before the due date, they asked for an extension, and our government just rolled over and went, "Yeah, go on then. They should
See,
be shielding anyway, the bastards."
but this is another thing of what the shooting this narrative that COVID is not that important because it's only disabled people in the elderly that some suffer from it, as if we're not considered the same value.
Yeah, I think it's 60% of people who died from COVID are disabled. I don't throw around this word lightly, but it's almost slightly eugenic in its thinking
Yes.
that we're placing values on human life that are simply economical,
Hmm.
but also that aren't true. The slapping of the DNRs on people with learning disabilities. So that means that you would slap DNRs on Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Richard Branson, and the guy that created Pokemon. You think they haven't brought any value to our world? There's not a day gone by where Steve Jobs hasn't dramatically changed my life.
Yeah. When you put it like this, it really does make you think about the way in which the idea that we have around the whole thing is completely backwards.
I think we should put DNRs on twats. That's my opinion. I think we should just look at someone and kind of, for example, have you been on there's a website called ismympaprick.co.uk where you just type in the name of your MP and it tells you if they're a prick or not based on how they voted in certain things. We should have something like that to determine who we put DNRs.
And that would be a great idea. I would be well behind that. Be well behind that. Do you know, while I was researching you were doing an interview, and there was something you said in it that really struck me. Where the person, you've said in the past that if you could not have this disability you have, you would choose otherwise. You would choose to keep it,
Yeah,
because it's made you who you are, and was one of the first times I've heard someone else say that, and it's something that it's taken me a long time to think like that, but it was really refreshing to hear you say that. And how did you come to that conclusion?
Well, I think we're all products of our environment and the lives we lead and the circumstances that we find ourselves in throughout our lives, from childhood going to adulthood, are the very things that shape our character. And I think it's really important to not belittle that and embrace it. And whilst the circumstances might not have always been ideal, and we aren't always in control of our circumstances, we're always in control of how we choose to handle those circumstances. And to a degree, that puts us in control of the results of our circumstances. And there's also just this little bit of fatalism to the whole thing, where there's nothing I can do to change it. And I'm not a fan of sitting about and engaging in conversations of whataboutery. Oh, if I wasn't disabled, this, that, and the other. If my mom had wheels, she'd be a bike. I don't dwell on that a lot either. So yeah, and also 80% of disabilities are acquired in later life, at working age, actually, 18 to 65. And there's often a lot of conversation about how traumatic it is to go from being non-disabled to being disabled. But very little consideration's gone to what it's like the other way. The adjustments you have to make if you go from being disabled to non-disabled, even though the transition is exactly the same. So to use like a really grim sort of out there example, say we both go randomly walk into a church one day, they pray for us, and we're healed. What do we do? Like, I'm with disability. I get away with a lot of like this. This does a lot of heavy lifting for my shit personality. So then I got to actually be a decent person. Like, what the hell, man?
I mean, you're right, because it's everything, every experience you've ever had has been lived with that disability.
Yeah.
So your whole life is changed dramatically. I'd never actually heard anyone make that point. And I always think if I wasn't in a wheelchair, I would have been like, I'm in one of those situations where I've always been disabled, right? If I wasn't, there's a lot of times where I think maybe I would have just been not a very nice person to be around.
Oh yeah, totally. Like you, I've always been disabled, and so I don't know any different. That's the really weird thing. People go, "We could not have your disability." I don't know what it's like. It might like being non-disabled might be shit. There we are. I've said it. I might not be the problem. Everyone else might be. And also, like you say, I think it's given me a certain level of humility, I suppose. Through proximity, it's taught me compassion and empathy and understanding. And without it, I might be a bit of a prick.
Exactly. I personally think it gives, for me, it has given give us greater drive to make something of myself. Whereas perhaps I would have been another one of the numbers if I wasn't.
Yeah, you'd certainly, there is that fear you certainly would have kind of fallen into your lane, so to speak, and just become another cog in the machine. Whereas a really good friend of mine said, if you want to know what you want to do with your life, find out what pisses you off. And if you find what your misery is, you'll find what your ministry is. And I think if I hadn't been disabled, I wouldn't notice the discrimination that happens. I wouldn't notice the problems. I wouldn't notice that the system's broken. And so I'd have just been completely blind to the whole thing.
Yeah.
But it's because I've had the experience and know what the problems are and I know how to fix them. And I get frustrated when I see them not being fixed. That's given me the drive to be a little bit combative and call it out when it exists. And changing the world is a really simple three-step process. I don't know why we make it so difficult. You see bullshit, you call bullshit, and you change bullshit. And anything else is just superfluous nonsense.
You really, think it's so true, and I'm listening to that. It makes me smile because you feel like you've been. I feel like the younger me would have been so beneficial to hear something like that. you just didn't hear it at mainstream school, going to mainstream school, and I was the only person in, with any kind of disability. I was very much cut off from any other disability for a long time, and it made me grow up with this idea that I was just so I needed fixed, like we spoke about earlier, and this idea that you're not normal, and so then it becomes this thing of how do you? I always worry about other people. When I think about people with disabilities, the things you need to go through can hit a bit harder because the access and the representation and everything we speak about here in terms of just in essentially every industry, there's always more obstacles, and I've always felt that you have to do double the work to get anywhere near the same sort of recognition. But how do you, if you were somebody that was struggling with that idea of a disability, what would be your first step in going and beginning to embrace it rather than feel it as a misery point in your head?
Well, I was quite old when I realised that it's not the job of the disabled community to fix a systemic problem that they didn't create.
Yeah.
And
So
the amount of things that the amount of kind of focus groups I've been to with like really big companies. I'm not talking about going in and doing things because I think charity is important, absolutely. But the amount of big multi-million pound companies I've gone into and done like focus groups for free and been ignored. And I didn't think I realised the value of my time or my expertise or of my opinion. And I think every disabled person should know the value they bring and the value they add, and that they have a certain knowledge pool that no one else has
mhm.
that has a value. So I'd say know your worth, know how you're prepared to be treated, and if ever those two things aren't meeting, absolutely say something. Don't there's this culture where we should be grateful for the handouts and the small mercies that we get. When that isn't true. I often say I am Adam Pearson, I am the best in the world at what I do. And if you want to try and replace me, you go right ahead. I'll be over here watching you laughing.
Yeah, it's a really good way of putting it. Like because your specific disability is really interesting. I'm not going to try and pronounce the name because I know that I'll butcher it. But
Go on, go for
oh,
it.
man,
Be bold.
I'm-
Yes, you can.
it's an absolute tongue twister, man. Hold on. I'm going to see if I can do this. I'm going to see if I can do this. I need to read it and see because it's like it's just. I
The,
practiced it I practiced it like a few times before this, and
the anticipation is killing me.
honestly, I practiced it a few times before this, and I could not do it. It was really frustrating. Um, let's see. So it is neurofibromatosis. Is
There we
that?
go. Neurofibromatosis. Good for you.
I'm actually genuinely impressed with myself just now. I thought you were going to be like, "That's not it at all." You know what you're talking about.
No, and sometimes again when you grow up around medicine, particularly genetics, and you're forever hearing all these long words and complex medical jargon, you sort of just it becomes second nature. And then when you try and have a conversation with someone about it, you use that language because it's the language you know and you've been brought up with. And then they just look back at you really confused. When I say things like genotype and phenotype and recessive and dominant LLs and what have you, I it's easy to forget that not everyone is okay with that, which is part of the key to communicating about disability, is that you need to meet people where they are as opposed to where you wish they were, and talk to them in language that they can understand. And also be nice about it. When you're an advocate, it's always easy to get on a soapbox, grab a megaphone, and just start yelling like some kind of crazy televangelist who goes, "You're going to hell," and then tries to win people.
Yeah.
And again, with disability, and there are people that do it, that just stand on a soapbox and go, "You're all bad people who hate the disabled." And because if I had that, I'd be like, "No, I'm a great guy. It's a bit wound up by one disabled guy right now. World of difference."
Yeah, well, because it comes back to what we said before about a lot of people aren't aware. It's a real lack of awareness. A lot of the people that I've met in my life that aren't part of any disabled community will say that, I didn't think about all these things that you have to think about until I met you. So it's been aware of the fact that a lot of people just don't know.
Yeah, but being aware is one thing, and when people go, you've inspired me today," the next question should always be, "That's great. What have I inspired you to do? What action are you now going to take?"
Yes.
Because if I've inspired you, you should certainly go out and do something. I'm not here to make you feel good.
But do you not think that the whole idea of the inspiration thing is almost used as a cop out rather than actually doing actions to make it easier for disabled people to live their life? Like if we don't do anything, but we just say, "Oh, but you're really inspiring, keep doing that." We're not going to build this app, or we're not going to work on having more people in movies represent. Because one of the things that we said earlier, I was speaking about, was just the idea that I didn't really know anyone with a disability, but if I could see it, if I had seen it on a TV screen, or if I'd seen myself represented somewhere, it may have helped me in some ways to come to, to familiarise myself with the idea that if I can see them do it, so maybe I can live that life as well. But there was very, very little of that, which is why representation is so important.
Yeah, I didn't think disabled people were allowed on TV when I was a kid because there weren't any. I just thought it was like an unwritten rule. To a degree, I still do think there is an undertone of that in TV. For example, the BBC are doing a festival of funny, like a comedy thing. And I looked at the lineup of performers and programs and what have you, and here is today's Adam Pearson fun fact. There are going to be more dead comedians than disabled comedians in that festival.
But, that is a pretty crazy fact when you think about it. Like, because even just in this podcast just now, you've made me laugh 2 or 3 times more than most of them I guess have in the past, and I'm like, there's no reason. There's definitely still like almost that prejudice of. It was the same with other like women, for example, from comedy wise. It's like, oh, women can't be funny. It's the same. Like disabled people can be funny. Disabled people can act,
Yeah.
do all these things.
Well, Catherine Ryan was talking about this the other day. She just tore Mock the Week's booking policy a new one, saying, "Oh, we can't have her on. She's too old. Let's book Frank Skinner, who's also not the youngest comedian on the face of the earth, right?" So there's this, and I love you, Frank, if you're listening. Your Muhammad Ali documentary was amazing, and that chat we had at baggage claim at Heathrow was life changing. But I should have said someone else who I don't know, shouldn't I? In that reference. Who's older in comedy? Larry David. There we go. Shoot for the top. And yeah, it's just so weird, isn't it? And my agent and I went for a chat with the head of the entertainment at a channel who shall not be named at a big British castle. And they were like, "Oh," and they said to us, "Oh, did you know 1 in 5 people in the UK are disabled?" And he looked shocked. I laughed very loudly and said, "Yeah, I know. We've been telling you that for years. Why aren't they on TV?"
Well, that is a lot of people. Like that is we are the largest minority in the world, and it's
Yeah, absolutely. With a global spending power of $13 trillion, which is more than the NFL, the NHL, the NBA, the MLB, WWE, and the UFC combined.
that fact right there is getting clipped. I tell you that. Because even I'm listening to that, thinking, see when you put it in that perspective, you go, even there's money on the table basically, not being touched by these. Because look at the names you put out there. I mean, I know you're a big wrestling fan, and so am I. And when you look at all those things combined to be more than that, and still have such a lack of representation or inclusion in any of these things. Do you know how much 12-year-old me would have loved to have seen anybody with any disability on a WWE ring? That would have been unbelievable.
Or done well. I'm not want to advocate for Eugene again. That was 2004 rock and roll. 2020, don't do Eugene again, please. Love you, Nick Dinsmore. That character should probably stay way back in early 2000.
The Eugene thing was always something that because I remember people used to use that as kind of an insult to me a little bit because I was so into wrestling. They would be like, "Oh, you can be like Eugene," and I was like, "But what?" Do you know? It's comes back to the idea that we can only we're either this inspiring group that's really motivating, or we're just like some cute thing to look at, and you're like, "Wow, you're so amazing." It's very condescending.
Yeah. And the ridiculous yet well-meaning things people say because that's all they know. Like I was talking to someone, I was on holiday, and I was talking to someone, and like, "So when you're not on holiday, what do you do in the morning?" And I was like, I wake up, I have my breakfast, I go for a run. To which their literal reply was, "Oh, like Forrest Gump." Yeah.
And
Yeah. That's exactly what I do. That's
because
exactly who I am.
they don't even people have said that to me before, but they're like, I say to them, well, my legs are a wee bit stiff, so I can only stand to a certain extent. And they'll be like, could you not just do a Forrest Gump then? Could you not eventually be like Forrest Gump? And I'm like, it's always this same sort of comparison. I mean, I always find it strange to me. I don't know how you feel about this, but the fact that there's any Olympics that's called the Special Olympics feels, and it just feels very, very condescending. That sort of way of putting it. These are athletes trying to compete, and you're calling it the Special Olympics. There's nothing about it that's seems like they're just, it all feels very like they look down on you with something like that. In my opinion,
It is. I do find that the term Special Olympics highly condescending.
Yes.
And it's this double-edged sword, because on one hand it brings the community together, and it gives people who might not otherwise have it a goal, a platform, a voice, and a bit of visibility. But then, as you say, Special Olympics is just a little bit wanky, isn't it? And it's sort of a bit archaic, and like that name might have been great when it was first introduced and debuted, but I think it needs to change. Or certainly needs
There's
looking
nothing
at.
modern about it. There's nothing modern about it at all.
No, it's sort of even the advertising is a little bit stuck in the 80s.
Yeah.
And you could do loads of really good videos, and instead of using slow piano music, give me some like metal. Put something like Smashed Into Pieces YOLO in the background, or Korn's cover of Word Up, or kind of Kill Switch Engage, This Fire Burns. Like, at least make it look edgy. Because disability can be really edgy and really cool if you give it room to be.
Well, it's all about how they present it. It's how it's perceived. So if you present it differently, it could be perceived differently.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
I wanted to ask you about AEW wrestling, because I've seen a lot of their stuff, and I feel like they seem to be making more of an effort than I've seen from most wrestling companies to include diversity other groups and potentially disability in some way. There was a guy, I'm forgetting his name now, but there was a battle royal they had with a man who had no legs and he was using his arms to get about, and he was actually part of the battle royal. And I'm annoyed that I'm forgetting his name, but it was amazing to me that actually seeing him in there made me go, that's exactly what you want to see more people do. And what do you think about, as a wrestling fan, do you see that as something that could potentially? I seen you ask somebody on Twitter the other day. You asked the question, "What is the next evolution of wrestling? Like the next era, so to speak? Do you see disability being more featured in that area?"
I think we certainly need more more disabled wrestlers, but we need good disabled wrestlers. We don't want to just throw in any random disabled bloke that can take a bump just to fill a void or tick a box. I want like the next disabled AJ Styles, Daniel Bryan, Seth Rollins, Cesaro. Cesaro's the greatest. Oh, I love you, Cesaro. Yeah, we need good kind of disabled wrestlers, and you've got guys like Dan Edge and Jeremy Irons and Zach Gowen who very much have made names for themselves on local indie circuits. And Zach Gowen had the WWE platform for a while,
Yeah,
but even in interviews, he'll admit he was given too much too young and
yeah,
handled it badly. So maybe give him another go, and yeah, just really highlight it, because a lot of the disability representation, particularly in WWE, is centered around charity, things like Be a Star, Connor's Cure, and then the in-ring product doesn't really give disability that much of a platform. So certainly give disability a real thrust, and
yeah.
and yeah, give disabled talent the chance to perform and do their thing, because they're certainly out there. They're absolutely out there. But then again, on the other hand, do I really want to have wrestling become something else that becomes part of my advocacy? Because wrestling is one of my forms of escape.
Yeah.
I don't want to think about Sia and her shit film, or the government's continual scapegoating of the disabled community. I'll either put on wrestling on my PlayStation and just not think about it for for a while.
That's always been the way I've looked at it as well. Like it's very much a place where you can just, um, like you say, an escape where you can imagine all these different scenarios, and that's wrestling's very much one of those things where you either love it or you just nothing it, and I fall in the love category. But
Oh, yeah. No one has ever gone wrestling. I mean, if it's on, I'll watch it. Like no one has ever said that.
That's so true. It's like there's
You,
no,
you, 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 you're either the guy that stays up till 3 a.m. watching Takeover, or you're the guy that makes fun of it and goes, "Oh, it's all the fake stuff, isn't it?" Like there's nothing in between, and you
yeah,
can certainly take people from one category to the other and show
definitely.
them it and be like, "No, just watch this and just trust me, go with me on this." I had this conversation with my best friend Roxy, and I was like, "Just trust me, just," and I know how her mind works, so I know how to kind of lead her. I'm just like, trust me, just Google the name Io Shirai and just trust me. And then about an hour later, I get a text going, Io Shirai is the best thing ever.
That's that. I mean, there's nothing that wrestling fans love more than a bit of fantasy booking, right? So I wanted to ask you the question on Twitter before. Would you ever do, would you ever participate in something like that? What would be if you could book it yourself, what would be your dream scenario? If you could book a match in a place in a particular event, what would it be?
Ooh. See, am I looking for me? Am I looking for the marks? I I would book the main event of WrestleMania. I'd have Roman Reigns versus, who would I have him against? Oh, I'd have Reigns, Owens, Cesaro, and Seth Rollins in a four-way for the title.
See that? I would definitely watch that for sure. I think the I was hoping that John Cena would come back and fight Drew McIntyre, but I don't think that's going to happen. I would love to see you against Paul Heyman for a promo. I think you could give him a good game.
I'm quite the wit. I think Paul Heyman has the knowledge and the fan base, but I have a lot of time for Paul Heyman. Have you seen his sit-down interview with Kenny McIntosh from Inside the Ropes?
I have not. I think I've seen clips of it. I've seen wee bits of it. I've not watched the full thing.
It's so good. Just the stories he tells and the way he talks and even when he sort of stays in character a little bit, when someone asks him about WrestleMania 30, and he just like, let's just say Brock Lesnar did go into business for himself, and he wasn't meant to break the streak, but Brock Lesnar just decided he wanted to break the streak. Do you think he could? I do. And then Leslie Twitter went, "Oh my God, Brock Lesnar wasn't meant to be the Undertaker." And I'm just sitting back watching, just shaking my head going, "You're all so silly sometimes." I love my IWC, but sometimes you can all be a little bit ridiculous.
He just knows how to play everybody. He's got everyone on strings, especially when he's got a microphone in his hand. And
He's the clip I saw recently was he was in the ring with Brock Lesnar, and then someone, and this was back when they had live crowds. Someone in the crowd proposed to their girlfriend during a Paul Heyman Brock Lesnar segment, and then the whole crowd started going, "She said yes, she said yes, she said yes," and then Paul Heyman clocks what's happened and just says to the guy, "The only reason she said yes is because she's not been up close and personal with the beast Brock Lesnar."
See, that's how you get heat. Because
interrupting a Paul Heyman promo is like your marriage is going to be. You don't have a chance.
By the way, the people listening to this are going to be like, they've just talked about equality and disability for the longest time, and they've just randomly switched to booking wrestling matches.
Yeah, I know. Someone asked me that on the Ask Adam Anything, and then was just like, yes, let's book Pearson Mania. Because yes, we were watching Takeover, and someone asked me what I do with Karrion Kross, and I was like, I put him in a fight pit with Timothy Thatcher. Because that would be stiff as a dick. And then Karrion Kross liked the tweet, and I was like, yes.
Oh, that's what you want. I mean, you've got a few big followers there. You got John Cena following you on Twitter. That's pretty cool.
Yep, Karrion Kross replies to my DMs. That's
next level. Like we had Matt Rabel on in English.
Oh, nice.
And he spoke really well on. He told this story about a friend of his that was in a wheelchair that had cerebral palsy, and he came to one of the indie wrestling events and was his manager, and it was brilliant. And he was making the point that we could be used more for that, and so it was really cool to have someone like him say something like that. He was really a nice guy.
Nice. I might text Eddie Dennis and be like, "You need a manager? I'm available."
Exactly that. Honestly,
I can say anything. I can say anything I want on that mic, Eddie Dennis. And if someone gets aggy about it, I can just say, "I'm disabled. I don't know any better." And it's like, get out of jail free card.
Exactly.
Anything I might say that has crossed the line.
And that is why you would never change it. That's why you would never change it.
Totally.
Because you've always got that get out of free. Like you see, it comes full circle.
And Shawn Michaels books NXT UK, so he'd very much be on board with that. I think he'd like my audacity.
I'm sure he would. And like, see if that's genuinely one of my goals in life. I'm like, if I don't at least once get in the middle of any wrestling ring with a microphone in hand, I won't have, my life won't have been complete. So I need to do it one time somehow, some way, at some point. That is definitely something. That's why I love talking to you about it, because you get, obviously, this podcast, I want to, I love what you said earlier, like, disability doesn't mean inability, and that is what this podcast is about. That's why the name is all about ability. It's not necessarily to promote ableism, but more so to say that if you focus on what you can do rather than what you can't, there's a lot that can be done. And so that is what, like, so when I think about, like, doing things, like when I realised that you were a wrestling fan, I was like, this is an opportunity to talk about it for once. You know, you don't often get that very much, especially with disability advocates. There's not very many are huge wrestling fans, so it's always fun.
We're an elite breed. We're an elite breed. It takes a lot of staying power to be a wrestling fan sometimes. Also, the schedule. Did you stay up and watch Takeover, or did you watch it the next morning?
I watched the first, like, I think I watched the first half hour, but I was like, it's hard because a lot of my mornings now, especially with podcasts, are early mornings, and I think it just really it kind of ruins my whole day if I just stay up till 3 o'clock in the morning. So I used to, me and my brother always every year we'll stay up for the Rumble and WrestleMania, but they're like the only two that my brain can handle anymore. Like, I watch it NXT though, of course, but I really am enjoying, like, right now. I would say my favourite thing to watch is AEW, and just how creatively free the wrestlers seem to be on TV.
Mm-hmm. I'm finding the whole Impact, New Japan, the Forbidden Door has been opened, and all this crossover stuff.
Yeah.
I find really interesting. I'm not going to say it's good yet, but I'm going to say I find it interesting.
Yes.
And the amount of fantasy matches you could book from that is
Oh,
insane.
they need to do Omega against, man, what's his name now?
Okada.
They have to book that at some point. That has to be booked for sure. And again, like, I'm certain that most of my viewers listening to this won't have a clue what we're talking about.
No, we could at this point people are very much. It's just us now, mate. It's just me and you talking about how badly I want to see John Moxley versus Ishii in a wrestling ring.
I think part of me likes talking about it because I'm like, my head always wants to get, when people say to me, "Oh, can you get this guest on? He'll be bigger, she'll be bigger, whoever." My head's always think the biggest guests are wrestling guests. I want to get more wrestling guests on. So
Yeah.
the more I can talk about it, the more chance that happens. So that's why it's always good to have a good chat about it. But we did get to switch back to more serious conversation. We did get a response to your great video you put out the other day about coming on here today from a fella who followed me since then. He was talking about how his brother I don't know if you've seen this tweet, but he was talking.
Yeah, I know, absolutely, and I certainly thought about it.
Yeah,
and I think I think the whole area of employment and recruitment isn't really geared up or isn't really equipped to handle disability. And I think it's all very much inaccessible from the word go, and always has been. As an example, just to give you an idea of what I mean, to contextualize it, for years disabled people were told remote working isn't possible.
Mhm.
And then as soon as non-disabled people needed it at the start of the pandemic, oh, how quickly it happened, right?
That is an excellent point. And
And so often application forms are online, the websites are inaccessible, the language is very convoluted. A lot of the answers are long form now, where you need to almost justify your existence. Then when you get to the interview stage, they'll ask you if you have any access needs. And I've been to interviews where they've asked me my access needs, and I've got on there, and they haven't been met. They haven't done what I requested to be done. And I think we need to start holding companies to account on how their recruitment process works. I'm currently involved with a startup called Kaleidoscope that looks at training and recruitment centered around disability. And we go into companies, and we do training around attitudes, behaviours and processes. We also take disabled graduates fresh out of uni and take them, so we have a group of people to start feeding into these companies. So we've got the supply and the demand sorted in that equation. And we also have an investment wing who invest in disabled entrepreneurs and their companies. We give them seed capital or angel investing, and then hook them up with other entrepreneurs who can give them guidance and open doors in almost a real Dragon's Den esque kind of way. So I completely understand the frustration of how, for example, if you're dyslexic, wordy forms are just an absolute nightmare. I think with a lot of moving parts going on. If you're partially sighted and you can't make the font bigger, or you can't switch the color palette around on your website, that could be quite difficult. I'm a huge fan of white text on a black background. That really works for me. They call it, a lot of websites now call it dark mode, which is a whole other kettle of fish. But those kind of features need to be built in. There was a case in America where Domino's website wasn't disability accessible, and it would have cost them about what $20,000-$30,000 to fix, to future proof themselves. And someone highlighted it, and they told them to go away, and they got sued for several $1,000,000.
Yeah, the long term thinking in that isn't really. I mean, it's so easy now as well when you think about companies like that have money to waste, and they're just 30,000 is nothing compared to having to spend millions. But it goes back to this idea, I feel like, of what is your value to the workforce, and you having a disability makes you, in their eyes, so much less valuable until, like you say, the world needs to work from home, and then all of a sudden, this idea that we've been pushing for years becomes normality.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. And then if also you have that attitude towards disability, do you think I'm going to shop in your store? Do you think I've eaten any Dominoes since I read that news story? I've had no Dominoes since I read that news story. In the UK, disabled people and their families have a disposable income that's kind of after tax, kind of fun money of 276 billion.
Yeah, I mean that's.
That's the amount of money that's walking away from you because you make bad decisions,
Mhm.
and you've equated disability with inability, and are completely lost out on that market. If your
Yeah,
website's not accessible, people aren't going to shop on it. That's more money lost, and it's a win-win. I don't. It befuddles me that people still can't get it. Kind of, I want to spend my money. Help me spend my money in your shop by making it accessible. How are you not getting this? Ah, and often people like respond well to the criticism when the speaking out movement happened in wrestling, for example. One of the Discovery Wrestling up in Scotland released their new code of conduct,
yeah.
and they were like, we won't tolerate sexism, racism, homophobia, or transphobia at our shows. And I just sent them a nice little tweet going, so ableism's still okay then. And then straight away added it. Straight away they were like, yeah, we forgot about that. We forgot about ableism, and we also forgot that people with Tourette's might not be able to help the occasional swear word. And thank you for the heads up.
Yeah. But
So
that's
yeah, it's okay. It's okay to make mistakes. Disabled people aren't expecting everyone to be perfect and get it straight away. What I am expecting is you to listen to disabled people, take criticism well, and don't be a dick about it. And if you say you're going to change, do it. Don't offer the disabled community platitudes. Don't say we're going to double disability by the year 2020, because 2 times 0 is still 0. Like, just do it. Stop talking about it. Like,
yeah.
money talks and bullshit walks, right?
Enough of the cheesy compliments and more action.
Yeah, totally. When you don't have more dead comedians and disabled comedians on your channel, then start offering me platitudinous nonsense. But until then, go away and fix the problem you clearly have.
It's almost we're such an afterthought, even in the process of looking really closely at equality. We're still an afterthought, which is amazing, considering the amount of value that we can bring. And I think one of the points that everyone should remember from this is that Domino's Pizza is really shit.
It is, but also, disability isn't mutually exclusive. And when I say that, I'm not going to go to bed tonight as like a white middle class Church of England male and wake up tomorrow morning as a black lesbian with a passion for Scientology. But disability can happen to anyone at any time. There are 2 types of people in this world: disabled people and people who will be disabled. And should you be a non-disabled person listening to this, who maybe hasn't agreed with everything I've said, fine, that's on you. If you were to have an accident, God forbid, tomorrow, driving, skiing, slipping in the shower, and what have you, and even temporarily need to use a wheelchair, how does your schedule look now? How does your journey to work look now? Can you get around your own house? Think about that. Let that haunt you for a while. And then come back to me and tell me you're okay with disability and that everyone's doing everything they can.
You're spot on, and I can't think of a better point to finish on, to be honest. So that let it haunt you for sure. That's because see, even just the way you've put that's like it should, because hopefully there are people that listen to this and go, that is something to consider, as it can happen at any moment, and it will happen eventually in this life. So all these things can, and you saying that, hopefully this is what this kind of platform is about, is trying to make people more aware of these things. And everything you said today, I really took something from it, and I think a lot of people will, and I really appreciate it.
No, thank you, and thank you for having me on. It's always good to have this conversation and to have it in a real frank manner. That isn't sort of, because the danger is it could have made it really easy, really light-hearted, and a little bit diluted. But I think just thrash it out in a meaningful way that might make a few people feel uncomfortable and might make people feel awkward. If you feel awkward, good. You should feel awkward. If you don't feel awkward, then we have both let you down in the worst way possible. And an awkward conversation is a good conversation because it means you push yourself out your comfort zone. And also, no one died from feeling awkward.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more. And I think you're spot on. Saying these things this way and being blunt about it, it should make you feel uncomfortable and awkward, because that is the situation. This is the reality, and a lot of people don't hear the actual reality of disability in all these areas that we spoke about.
Although they have now, we've done it. We've fixed disability for everyone.
Well, you need to, one day at a time, tear down these barriers that we have.
Yeah, baby steps. Baby steps.
Thanks again for coming on. This has been a really, like, of all the podcasts I've done, I've really enjoyed this conversation, because it touches on all the things that you feel as if you have to hide as a disabled person as well. So to be able to actually be on a platform and express that with somebody that understands it, and, it feels good.
No, thank you. It's always good to do things like this and have these deep, frank conversations. So the pleasure was all mine. Good sir.